Good evening. TR Wheatley, Niteni Sigasawin, Opaskoyakoche. Welcome to APTN National News. This week, APTN told you about a new report that says the Alberta Energy Regulator has been underreporting tailing leaks across the province. Today, we have more from the report's author and reaction by Jesse Cardinal from the Keepers of the Water. Here's APTN's Chris Stewart.
It took 6 months for ecologist Kevin Timoney to put 6,000 pages and 514 separate PDF files together, given to him through a Freedom of Information request. After reviewing data from tailings leaks from 2014 to 2023, mostly in the oil sands area, he found many inconsistencies to information reported to the public by the Alberta Energy Regulator, or AER. He found that less than 4% of 514 reported tailing leaks over the decade were actually inspected by the Energy Regulator.
They also made the statement that in all 514 of the spills that they divulged to the public, that there were no environmental impacts. None of the 514 spills caused an environmental impact, which of course that is also another red flag that doesn't make any sense in terms of the known science of tailings spills.
One spill was underreported by a factor of 100, with 4.5 billion liters leaked, and other spills just disappearing.
There were quite a few missing spills that they did not report. The two major ones would have been obviously the two curl spills that were, making national news at the time. But also in going through the FOIP, I was able to determine that there were another 454 spills of tailings of one sort or another that were not part of the publicly available database.
Energy Regulator.
For Jesse Cardinal, Executive Director of the Keepers of the Water, a non-profit with a mandate to protect the water and the environment, the new report was not a surprise. She believes drastic changes are needed.
The AER has failed for decades to responsibly manage the caretaking of the environment. So we need a different system, a different body that we can trust, because right now all trust has been lost with the Alberta Energy Regulator. So we need a system in place that also brings into account the First Nations who want to work in having balance and sustainability and diversifying the economy.
The Minister of the Environment was not available to comment, but his office gave a written statement which reads in part, Alberta's oil sands are one of the most highly monitored in the world, and there are clear mandatory processes in place to prevent spills and to respond quickly if unplanned releases do occur. It goes on to say, while Alberta's monitoring system is one of the best in the world, we expect the AER to do its job and manage these incidents in a timely and effective way. The Alberta Energy Regulator would not agree to an interview, but also released a statement which reads in part, the AER routinely conducts inspections to ensure that releases have been cleaned up and remediated in accordance with the regulations. Impacts to wildlife due to the release of a reportable substance within the AER's jurisdiction must be immediately reported to the AER. It goes on to say, the AER routinely conducts release inspections to assess potential adverse impacts to the environment and wildlife, and to ensure that releases have been cleaned up and remediated in accordance with the regulations. Earlier this week, the province announced plans to double oil production. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Thanks, Chris. The Yukon Environmental Socio-Economic Assessment Board, or ESAB, has issued its evaluation report on the 25-year relicensing of the Whitehorse Rapids Generating Station. It's the first time since the assessment board was created that the station is undergoing a license renewal. Shara Connors tells us how it went.
The Whitehorse Rapids Generating Station was built in the late 1950s and impacts the territories of the Kwanlindun, Ta'an, and the Carcross-Tagish, as well as the asserted territory of the Taku River Tlingit. First Nations have long claimed the dam as a barrier to migrating fish, especially Chinook salmon, which have been in decline for decades. YesAb's report says the dam's fish ladder can block some fish from migrating upstream, and the dam's turbines can kill or injure fish. The board determined relicensing the station could have detrimental effects on Chinook salmon, aquatic life, and First Nations wellness. However, it says those effects can be mitigated with terms and conditions. YesAb's recommendations include finding alternative means for fish passage, like upgrading the fish ladder and developing a plan to reduce fish turbine deaths. YesAb recommended the dam's renewed license be in place for another 25 years until 2050. Yukon Energy said in a statement to APTN News it's encouraged by YesAb's recommendations and is reviewing its report and the proposed terms and conditions. The Crown Corporation's license is up for renewal at the end of May. It's now up to the decision bodies, the territorial and federal governments, as well as the Kwantlen First Nation, to either accept, vary, or reject YesAb's recommendations. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
The Manitoba First Nations Police Service has appointed an interim chief of police following the death of former Chief Doug Paulson. On Wednesday morning, fire crews were called to a residence in Portage-la Prairie, Manitoba, which RCMP later confirmed was Paulson's. When crews arrived, the home was completely burned. Human remains were found, which are also believed to be that of Paulson. On Thursday, the MFNPS appointed Inspector Jason Collin as interim chief of police. Collin has over 26 years of experience in policing, including 8 years with the Winnipeg Police Service. He is a member of the Norway House Cree Nation. Paulson is remembered as a tireless advocate for Indigenous-led, culturally sensitive policing. A social media post made by an employee of the Interlake Eastern Regional Health Authority in Manitoba caused a community-wide uproar and got the author fired. The post made on Monday questioned Premier Wab Kinu's decision to search the Prairie Green landfill for missing and murdered Indigenous women. Regional Health Authority brass got wind of the post. A news update that was issued on Tuesday said, quote, direction was given to remove the post and the employee is now no longer working with IERHA. It goes on to say posts of this nature are deeply hurtful. We remain committed to reconciliation, anti-racism, and to mitigating further harms through swift and decisive action. Today, the federal and Saskatchewan Ministers of Health announced a new $40 million investment. This investment is set to help Saskatchewan residents accessing life-saving medications. Canada's Minister of Health, Mark Holland, and his provincial counterpart signed an agreement at the Children's Hospital in Saskatoon to invest $40 million toward 3 medications for rare diseases. The medications will treat a rare kidney disease and 2 types of cancer. Saskatchewan is the 4th province to sign the agreement, following Alberta, Newfoundland and Labrador, and British Columbia. Saskatchewan Health Minister Jeremy Cockrell says the new deal will support the province's drug plan.
The government of Saskatchewan is committed to providing high-quality, accessible health services and programs to our residents. And this agreement and this partnership with the federal government is important to the ongoing commitment of both the federal and provincial governments to improve access to innovative treatments, early diagnosis and screening, and coverage of these high-cost drugs.
Time for a short break. When we come back, we'll tell you about efforts for Michif language revitalization. You don't want to miss that. Michif language revitalization just got a $15.3 million boost from the federal government. The funding is part of efforts to support the Federal Indigenous Languages Act and will be distributed by the Manitoba Métis Federation. Sierra Bettens has more.
We have approximately less than 1,000 Michif speakers in the province, and with the help of the federal government, we're able to give Michif language a chance to survive and to prosper.
On Thursday, Canadian Heritage unveiled $15.3 million in funding to the Manitoba Métis Federation over 5 years to help revitalize the Michif language. Talib Noor Mohammed, the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage, was in Winnipeg to share the news.
It's critical to ensuring that the Métis Nation here and the Manitoba Métis Federation are able to direct, to design, and to deliver the support for Michif language in a way that suits the people.
Andrew Carrier is the MMF's Minister of French and Michif Language Protection. He says the 5-year funding commitment will allow the MMF to support long-term programming.
There has been a lot of starts, or sometimes false starts, and completions, but we're never able to provide a full gamut of services because of the funding agreements. But with this 5-year plan, we have a good foundation that we're able to move forward in the preservation and promotion of Michif languages.
From Michif French spoken in communities like Saint-Laurent to Southern Michif, which blends French and Cree, there are several dialects of the language. Noor Mohammed says there's been a 45% increase in the number of people who can carry a conversation in Michif over the past few years.
That shows that these types of efforts, these types of initiatives have a profound impact.
Carrier says the MMF is exploring numerous Michif language projects, including classes, books, and immersion programs.
Introducing the Michif language at a very early age through our own early learning childcare centers. And so we're working with the childcare directors as to storybooks in Michif.
At the MMF's 2024 Annual General Assembly in October, MMF Human Resources Minister Anita Campbell said the Federation is developing an AI model to help revitalize Michif. Carrier said that the project is still in the works. He says the MMF also hopes to unite elders and youth through language programming.
So we bring them together and they learn from each other, and we hope to inspire further learning opportunities through these gatherings.
The MMF is now accepting requests for proposals through its website from individuals and communities interested in developing Michif programming. Sierra Buttons, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
This week, a surprising twist in the negotiations for a final settlement agreement on child welfare. Since 2007, the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society and the Assembly of First Nations have filed a number of complaints at the Canadian Human Rights Commission. They won a number of cases saying Canada discriminated against First Nations children in care by underfunding the programs. Hundreds of children were removed from their homes and could have stayed with their families if services had been funded at the same level as they are for other children in Canada. A deal to put $47.8 billion over 10 years into child welfare to fix the system was negotiated, then rejected, and now it's alive again. I'm joined by Ottawa correspondent Karen Pugliese to find out what happened this week. Thanks for joining us, Karen. Can you give us a brief history of the settlement agreement and what it was about?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, there were a series of cases that went before the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, primarily led by the First Nations Child and Caring Society, being Cindy Blackstock taking the lead there, and the Assembly of First Nations. And so the idea there was that they were trying to prove that Canada discriminated against kids in care. And a series of decisions and orders came out of the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. This particular one was to fix the system. And that meant putting money into the system. And it meant also fixing things in the system to try to, the way the system works, to kind of keep kids out of care in the first place. So both the Chiefs of Ontario and the Anishinaabe Nation had standing before the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, so they primarily negotiated a final settlement agreement. They ratified it in Ontario, and then they put it before chiefs nationally, hoping that it would get ratified, but they voted it down.
The big question, why did they turn it down?
Yeah, it gets a little complicated, but basically the reason they turned it down, like you could say there's two reasons. One was that they were worried that the funding wasn't stable, and the second one was concerns that the government still retained too much control over the system and decision-making in the system.
So was the settlement agreement dead?
I thought so. I think a lot of people thought so. Because what happened at the Special Chiefs Assembly was chiefs decided to pass a resolution, and that resolution mandated the creation of Chiefs Children's Commission. And that commission was supposed to go back to Canada and say, we want to reopen the deal, negotiate from scratch, create a new national agreement. So that's where we left things in December. And then just this week, a press release came out saying that the settlement agreement was alive. And apparently what happened is the chiefs of Ontario, they always liked this deal, they negotiated it, they knew it wasn't perfect, but they wanted to go ahead with it. So they approached Indigenous Services Canada and said, let's go ahead with this agreement. And then Indigenous Services Canada turned around and sent a letter to the Assembly of First Nations and said, we will only be negotiating with Ontario.
That's very interesting. So then do they get all the 47.8 billion?
No, there is some kind of formula inside there that's been worked out that says what Ontario gets. They're just not saying publicly what the number is yet.
So what happens then to the First Nations that are outside of Ontario?
I don't know. Nobody knows. I guess they could go back to the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal for litigation to try to force the government back to the table.
So did the minister say why she won't negotiate with chiefs outside of Ontario?
No, I mean, not specifically. The only thing in the letter was that there was no mandate. So what does that mean? It could be that you could interpret that as there's no legal mandate, that only the Ontario chiefs had standing before the tribunal, so they're just not going to. I mean, I certainly think if they wanted to, they could. But, you know, with all the stuff going on in Ottawa, the Prime Minister resigning, it could be that they feel there's no political mandate to do it either. It wasn't specified. But she did say why she was going ahead. I mean, basically what she said is, I've got like groups of First Nations who want to have a deal, and it would be wrong not to work with them.
So I guess then, you know, with all this turmoil and different things going on, do you know why Ontario kind of wants to go ahead with this?
Yeah, I mean, what Ontario said was, you know, like they know the deal's not perfect, but they worked on it, they believe in it. They're going to be tweaking it so that it's suitable to the region instead of a national deal. So there's negotiations going on and maybe a chance to change things a little bit. But very much they're looking at the political atmosphere too. Like we just had Prime Minister Trudeau resign in Ottawa. There is going to be a new Prime Minister. There will be a new Liberal leader, so therefore a new Prime Minister. It looks like there could be an election triggered. And for chiefs who remember the Stephen Harper Conservatives, they remember getting a lot of cutbacks to programs. And so there's a real fear that if an election's triggered and there's a change in government, that they could get a worse deal should the Conservatives be elected. There is fear of that. So they decided to go ahead now.
Yeah, we'll definitely be following this story. Thanks, Karen, for your update.
Okay, thanks so much, Chair.
Time for one last break. Then we'll tell you about the 3 Indigenous queens on Canada's Drag Race. Stick around. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Downtown Winnipeg, Manitoba is seen from across the Red River in the St. Boniface area. Jason Corshane wanted us all to enjoy the skyline after a fresh snowfall. You can send photos to share at aptn.ca if you would like to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. St. John's 1, Fredericton 0. Kuujjuaq -7, Happy Valley Goose Bay -1. Val-d'Or -6, Quebec City also -6. Sault Ste. Marie -4, Toronto 1 degree. Big Trout Lake -19, Sudbury -5. Churchill -16, The Pas -13. Barons River -13, Gimli -11. North Battleford -21, Swift Current 2 degrees. Uranium City -26, Buffalo Narrows -17. High Level -6, Grand Prairie 3 degrees. Red Deer 2 degrees, Lethbridge 7. Quesnel 2 degrees, Kamloops 5. Fort Nelson -3, Prince Rupert 7 degrees. Rock River -2, Beaver Creek -12. Norman Wells -8, Fort Simpson -13. Paulatuck -8, Fort McPherson -18. Cambridge Bay -24, Chesterfield -18. Resolute -25, Iqaluit -12. This season of Canada's Drag Race is filled with representation. 3 Indigenous drag performers joined this season. 2 were eliminated, leaving 1 left to compete for the title of Canada's next drag superstar. Video journalist Rachel May sat down with the 3 queens that hit the main stage.
Part of me as an artist is I like to incorporate my culture as I know more about it and as it relates towards me. And I think it's also, you know, regalia in our ceremonies and our colors and our names and all these things that I'm now having access to, I layer it in.
Jaylene Time is a Two-Spirit Métis performer from Zagami and Anishinaabe in Saskatchewan and a 60s Scoop survivor. She shares her Indigenous culture through drag.
You know, as a 60s Scoop adoptee myself, it is something that I've had to navigate in Truth and Reconciliation, and to be able to take ownership of my culture and really explore and navigate to find the answers of my history.
Jaylene was the first Indigenous queen to leave the competition in episode 5. In that same episode, Jaylene and Zana, a Two-Spirit Métis queen, had a viral moment. Zana shared their effort to reclaim lost culture after their grandfather was a victim of the 60s Scoop. Jaylene gave Zana a Métis sash.
Obviously, you could see, like, I was already upset. I was already in tears. And then as soon as I received that, like, I had my full breakdown, which, like, it again, just getting onto Drag Race, even that moment, like, I felt this kind of weight lift off of me a little bit, which was really nice.
In episode 7, Zana became the second Indigenous queen to leave the show. Zana said learning to overcome trauma and embrace their Métis culture made them proud to represent it.
I'm still presenting Métis drag. I'm still presenting Métis people, regardless if I match the typical aesthetic that people would expect of that. And, like, my success is Métis success. My success is Indigenous success.
The Virgo Queen is an Afro-Indigenous drag performer still in the competition. For Virgo, incorporating indigeneity into drag has been a learning process.
It's been like baby steps for me, just because I really want to make sure that I am doing it correctly and doing it respectfully.
Virgo said all 3 Indigenous queens have stayed in touch.
And obviously now, like, Jaylene and Zana are, like, really big supports, and already I've, like, gained a broader understanding of my culture. I feel like I've already been more enriched in the culture.
New episodes of Canada's Drag Race air Thursdays at 9 p.m. Eastern on Crave. Rachel May, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
Yes, queens. That's all the time we have for you for this Friday, January 10, from all of us at APTN. Kinanaskomatin. Thank you for being here with us this week. Have a great weekend.